The average life expectancy was 30 stat has fooled almost everyone, and once you understand why it's misleading, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. Here's the thing, that number is real. Researchers have documented it across dozens of ancient and pre-industrial populations. But average life expectancy of 30 and ancient adults died at 30 are not the same sentence, and almost nobody explains the difference. This video is about what the actual data shows from burial sites, from fossilized skeletons, and from living hunter-gatherer tribes that anthropologists study today as a window into the Paleolithic. By the end, you'll have a completely different picture of what ancient human life actually looked like, and there's one piece of evidence near the end that I think is the most surprising part of this whole story. So let's start with the number that started all of this. Among traditional hunter-gatherer populations, average life expectancy at birth ranges from about 24 to 36 years. That's the stat. And yes, it's accurate. But here's what it actually reflects. Somewhere between 30 and 43% of hunter-gatherer children never reach their 15th birthday, with most of those deaths happening before age 5. Think about what that does to an average. If you take a group of 100 people and a large chunk of them die in infancy, the math pulls the average way down, even if the adults in that same group are living into their 60s and 70s. Life expectancy and aging are two completely different things. Life expectancy is calculated using all causes of death, including illness, accidents, and war, and it factors in the mortality rates of children, full-grown adults, and the elderly alike. So when someone tells you ancient humans only lived to 30, what they're really describing is a world with brutal childhood mortality. They're not describing what happened to the adults who survived it. And when you look at what happened to those adults, the story changes completely. Researchers Gervin and Kaplan found that the most common age of death for hunter-gatherers who survived past 15 was 72. Not 30, not 45, 72. They compared modal ages of death for modern Americans and for both recent and ancient hunter-gatherers, and the modal adult lifespan ranged from 68 to 78 years for pre-modern societies. That's not a dramatic gap from where we are today. The gap between ancient humans and modern humans isn't really about how long adults lived. It's almost entirely about how many children survived to become adults in the first place. Now, keep that in mind because there's still something bigger coming. But first, let's look at the fossil record because the bones back this up in ways that are hard to argue with. Archaeologists have found Homo erectus remains from a site in Georgia dating back roughly 1.8 million years, and one of those individuals, often called the Old Man of Dmanisi, had lost nearly all of his teeth years before he died. Without the ability to chew, he should have starved. The only explanation is that his group kept him alive, feeding him, supporting him, keeping him safe. That's compassion, that's community, and it's 1.8 million years old. Then there's Shanidar 1, a Neanderthal found in a cave in Iraq. His skeleton tells a remarkable story. One arm was withered or missing, he was likely partially blind, probably deaf, and had severe injuries throughout his body. And yet he survived into his 40s or 50s. His group fed him, protected him, and kept him alive for decades despite contributing very little in terms of physical labor. That's not a society that abandoned its elderly. That's a society that valued them. Which brings us to the part of this story that I think most people have never heard. And it might be the most important thing here. Even in hunting and gathering societies where mortality rates are high, adult lifespans average twice those of chimpanzees, which become decrepit during their fertile years and rarely survive them. So the question isn't just, did ancient humans live long? The deeper question is, why did humans evolve to live so much longer than our closest primate relatives in the first place? And there's a hypothesis that answers it in a way that's genuinely surprising. It's called the grandmother hypothesis, and it comes from the work of anthropologist Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah. Hawkes was studying the Hadza, a group of hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, and noticed that while young children could pick berries themselves, it was the older women in the community pulling up the difficult root vegetables. She found a correlation between how well children grew and their mother's foraging work until the mother had another baby. Then the children's growth correlated with their grandmother's work. Grandmothers were literally keeping children alive and well fed while mothers were occupied with newborns. The hypothesis suggests that when ecological changes in ancient Africa spread profitable foraging targets that infants and small children couldn't handle, reliable foraging by older females near the end of their own fertility could subsidize dependent grandchildren and shorten their daughters' time to next conception. In other words, grandmothers didn't just help, they may have driven the evolution of human longevity itself. Researchers argue that grandmothers are a driving force behind the increased longevity of our species compared to other primates. Living longer wasn't just a biological accident, it was selected for generation after generation because grandmothers who lived longer raised more surviving grandchildren. Long life was a survival technology. So what actually killed ancient people, if not old age? The most common killers in modern hunter-gatherer populations are diseases that modern medicine has rendered much less dangerous, especially gastrointestinal and respiratory diseases, and few people suffer from diabetes, heart disease, and other degenerative diseases of the modern world. Infectious diseases like smallpox and measles, the ones we think of as ancient plagues, were actually products of agricultural civilization, not the Paleolithic. In spite of variation across populations, a clear pre-modern human pattern emerges. Age profiles of mortality risk are remarkably similar across groups. The mortality hazard slows to very low levels by age 10, doubles around age 40, and doubles again before 60. The body wasn't built to fall apart at 30. It was built to run hard for decades, with the real biological aging process kicking in right around the same time it does for us today. So here's what we actually know. Ancient life was a gauntlet, and the gauntlet was almost entirely in the first 5 years. Infancy and childhood were dangerous, but if you survived to 15, you could expect a reasonable lifespan, with mortality rates staying low until around age 40. The adults who made it through childhood weren't biologically fragile or built for short lives. They were built for long ones because long lives, specifically long post-reproductive lives, turned out to be one of the most powerful evolutionary advantages our species ever developed. The average life expectancy of 30 isn't wrong, it just doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means. Strip out the childhood mortality, and you're looking at a species whose adults regularly lived into their 60s and 70s, without hospitals, without antibiotics, without any of the infrastructure we assume is responsible for long human lives. The infrastructure was always there, it just looked like a grandmother digging up tubers so her daughter could have another child. That's the real story. And next time someone tells you ancient humans barely made it to 30, you'll know exactly what question to ask them. Are you talking about life expectancy, or are you talking about lifespan? Because those are not the same thing.